Welcome to another episode of the Morning Almonds Podcast. It's not breakfast, it's nourishment. The kind that feeds us through music, food, storytelling, and honest conversation. Let's get cracking. Hey friends, welcome to the Morning Almonds Podcast, and I thank you so much for joining me today for the first episode. This has been a really long time coming. It's been a couple years in the making with a few sidetracks and life, right? So this first episode is titled, What I Could Not Know. And this is my uncut story, where I get to sit back and tell my story uninterrupted, uncut, unabridged, and how I basically built a personality around all the bad things that happened to me in my life. The title of this episode is inspired in part by the chorus of Couldn't Know by Pa. So I want you to know things I could not know. I couldn't know things because I was too deep in my own storm. I was too wrapped up in my own noise. I was too busy surviving to notice. This is where we begin. My story isn't easy, but it's mine, and maybe it helps you feel less alone. And by the end of this episode, it's my hope that you understand why I frame things the way that I do. It's why I advocate the way that I do. I want people to eat. I want people to have the right to be who they want to be, to take risks, to shake all the trauma and abuse off. Don't make your personality your trauma and abuse. That's not you. If I only help change one person's life through relating my journey, it's worth it. By hearing my story, I hope you know you aren't alone and things can get better. I was born in Dodge City, Kansas, June 12, 1976. My dad and mom lived together, I'm not sure where. And then my sister was born about 14 months later. And the story goes that my dad left shortly after she was born. My mom talks about that Bob would leave, sporadically throughout their marriage and just take off and be gone for days at a time, doing who knows what. And then would come back, and this pattern kind of was just ongoing. I guess there was one day that he didn't come back. So, not growing up with a father, never meeting the guy, he passed away in 95, so I never had a chance for closure. There's the phantom father effect. When you never knew your father, your mind often fills the gap with imagined versions of him. Sometimes they're idealized and then sometimes feared. This can create identity anxiety. Who would I be if I would have known him? The what if game, right? Like, what if this, what if that? And then there's the self-doubt. Wondering if you inherited traits from him that you can't fully understand. I look exactly like the guy. I'm a spitting image of him. And there's so many other things that I picked up from him along the way that weren't directly from him. They were from his absence, right? But we'll get into that in later episodes. We'll have a whole father episode. Probably multiple. And then there's also the restless searching. Looking for pieces of him in stories, photos, or even myself, right? Like always wanting to know. And because he passed away 30 years ago, there's no possibility of direct conversation, no reconciliation, or simple curiosity satisfying questions that I can ask him. So that can lead to complicated grief, a loss that feels stuck because it can't be resolved, and like I mentioned earlier, those persistent what-if loops, mental spirals that keep the absence alive in the present. Emotional displacement. There's anger, sadness, and longing that sometimes gets redirected toward other relationships. That is so true in my situation, anyway. But then there's also the, feeling different from peers who had fathers present. I remember I didn't even realize that I didn't have a dad until about third grade. Maybe it was fourth grade. I had another kid in my class make fun of me for not having a dad. And it really didn't hit me when he first made the dig, right? Because I just lived my life. I didn't realize I didn't have a dad. I had my mom, I had my sister, and I lived my life. So until it was pointed out to me by a peer. That was the first time that I really started having those thoughts of being different and noticing those things and feeling less than because of that. So there was that. And I have forgiven my father. My dad was a medic in Guam during Vietnam. He joined the Navy at 18. And when he came back from Guam, being a medic, taking care of all the guys, all the horrific things that he'd seen, he came back a totally different person. So Bob was a happy-go-lucky. He was the youngest son. He was the one that made everybody laugh and always had something silly to say or do or perform. And when he came back, all that joy was gone. So it took me years to realize that a lot of that stuff wasn't his fault. And again, it wasn't my fault. The biggest thing was that I learned that he didn't leave because of me. Not having grown up with my dad or another man in the house, I notice, I find myself today, I watch how fathers and sons interact. I've seen amazing interactions and I've seen some really horrible interactions between fathers and sons. But I will literally stop what I'm doing and observe and watch and see what's going on because it fascinates me. So that left my mom to raise me and the sister that I grew up with in the same house by herself. And she was still going through things of her own, right? So she had her childhood to deal with, her adulthood to deal with. She had to raise these kids by herself. And I remember a very peaceful childhood, a very, I guess, typical childhood up until, I really feel like, 5th, 6th grade for sure is when things started to change with mom. I don't know if it was what she was going through at the time, which who knows what that would have been, or just the fact that I was getting older and the independence and the whole dad thing and acting out in different ways, right? I don't know. I went to kindergarten in public school in Dodge City, and then 1st grade and half of 2nd grade at a Christian school in Dodge City, where they told us when we died, God would show us all of our sins on a screen. That was the first time I realized was abuse now, was that religious abuse that happens on children. All the things that we're forced to believe, all the guilt, all the shame. It's a form of child abuse. But I can remember always being hungry. I would always eat the other kids' leftovers. And I can remember one day we were swinging and there was a girl next to me and at recess, and for what reason, I don't know, I say the word bullshit. And this girl, she like when you fly off your swing and you land, that's what this girl did. She had her last swing, she went off, she leaped off her swing and she took off running. And I don't know if I knew where she was going at the time, but it was shortly after that I got called into the head pastor's office. And I found myself getting paddled with a big wooden board, big wooden paddle with holes in it. And it hurt. It hurt like a motherfucker. That was my experience with Christian school. Then we moved to Greensburg in the winter of '83. We also grew up without a car. So we walked everywhere. Everywhere we went, we walked. Some of my earliest memories in Dodge City are walking downtown and waiting at stoplights and by the train tracks. And we always walked everywhere we went. We had to depend on others. We had to do what others wanted to do. We had to just kind of be at their whim when we went places with people. And so I have vivid memories of after we had moved to Greensburg. I was 6. But I can remember walking, to the grocery store, or walking to church, or walking to school, and people just driving right by you, and family members even too, right? Now they want to walk. They want to carry 7 bags of groceries between the mom and the 2 little kids. They're choosing that. So not having a car was big. I didn't work out. I didn't have leg day because I walked everywhere I went up until I was a junior in high school. Somebody had sold us a car real cheap from the church we went to. It was an 88 Buick LeSabre. So this is why I can walk now and walk a long time and it doesn't bother me. As I got older, the triangulation began from my mother with my sister. And if you're not familiar with what triangulation is, in a family system, a triangle is when two people in conflict, like me and my mom, pull in a third person, my sister, to manage tension or control the narrative. In abusive and narcissistic households, this often mutates into manipulative triangulation. So you have the golden child versus the scapegoat roles. So one sibling, often the younger one, as was my case, is idealized, praised, and protected, the golden child. The other, often the older, me, criticized, blamed, or held to impossible standards, the scapegoat. And not only that, but it's the abuse, the verbal and the mental and the physical abuse that would happen, how much she would take out on me, and then I would watch her treat my sister in totally different ways. It took me a long time to understand why. And a lot of it comes again from my dad. I looked just like the guy. And then there was my other siblings. I grew up most of my life not knowing that I had two other sisters. No one told me I had an older sister. And then I'm not sure how old I was when I found out about my younger sister. I believe it was when Grandpa Zeck passed. And they had sold some of his coin collection, and since my dad was dead, they were going to split his portion between his kids. I knew of my sister Erica, and I grew up with my sister Sarah, but I knew nothing about my sister Amber. And I grew up most of my life believing that this was just me and Sarah, so much of my father's life was kept from me. And that wasn't to protect me. It was to protect my mom from those thoughts and feelings, and I know that now. So it was odd later in life to realize that you find out you have another sibling. I don't have a relationship with my mom now. We've both tried many times over the years, and I've even tried since I've been on my journey of change and growth. It's obviously not going to work at this point. But there are some pros about not having relationships with your parents, like less arrested personal growth. I'm not stifled by thoughts or actions of consequences of what they might think. I already know, well, the one's past, and the other one, it doesn't matter what she thinks. I don't have to live up to any of those expectations. I had to trade. I had to, trade what a stable family looks like and getting the support that a young person needs. But that's all part of my journey. It's all part of my path, and everything happens the way it's supposed to. If it wasn't for all of that, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. I wouldn't be here wanting to help other people just by sharing my story. I don't have a degree. I don't have a medical degree. Never graduated college. But I have tons of experience and many adventures to share and learn from. So the other part of the pillars of this podcast are food and music and storytelling. So this is where food comes in and why it's so important to me. My mother was not a good cook. And beyond that, we were very food insecure. We had one income. We were on food stamps. We were on food stamps where you went to the grocery store and you had to pull the stamps out of the book in front of everybody else behind you and the cashier and the sacker and everything, right? There wasn't an EBT card, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that spares some shame out there for folks. And again, like in my case, my mom was working, but we were still struggling, just like now. It's the working poor that are struggling the most, trying to make ends meet. So growing up food insecure, we would get government cheese and peanut butter, and other things from a gal that lived catty corner from us in Greensburg. Maudie Thomas lived behind us to the side, and I would go over there and pick up our monthly allotment of stuff. And I can also remember, going to the grocery store and just buying the cheapest shit that we could. You know what's worse than like any of that government food? Have you ever tried dehydrated milk? Have you ever had milk that came from flakes? That it tastes worse than skim milk. And skim milk is, I could probably drink some now. So I started to learn how to cook when I was, 12, 13. Because I realized that if I wanted to eat, I would have to do it. And I really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed cooking. My first time I ever cooked dinner for the family, I don't remember how old I was. But I made a batch of hamburger helper, and it was the lasagna hamburger helper, I believe. And I was so proud of myself. I remember sitting down at the table, putting out, spoonfuls on plates, and sitting down. I can remember exactly where I was sitting in the kitchen. I'd taken that first bite and realizing that something was horribly wrong. When you make hamburger helper, after you cook the hamburger and you put in the noodles and you put in the spices or the sauce packet mix, you're supposed to add water in that to help cook the noodles and everything come together. I failed to do that. And so we had a very crunchy, dry, not done hamburger helper. And I was so disappointed. I remember being super upset that I had fucked that up so bad. But what it taught me was to always have your recipe out. And good chefs always have their recipes out, no matter how many times they've made a dish. Being able to feed myself was another form of freedom, just like having my bicycle was a form of freedom. Feeding yourself is freedom. And so then that kind of began a whole lifelong employment, jobs, work with food. I started at Dillon's grocery store there in Greensburg, and I worked for Dillon's off and on after high school through college in Lawrence and Dodge City. And then I got into the restaurant world and worked in a number of restaurants for years, grocery stores, some delis. And now my primary job is a food safety inspector for the state of Kansas. So I still get to be around food and people and restaurants, but I don't have to deal with the everyday stuff. And religion was always part of my life. I was forced to go to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. Every special thing there was, I had to go to church. And I found it absolutely boring. And I can remember one time sitting down at the house in Greensburg and my mom trying to teach me how to speak in tongues. I was too young to understand. What the fuck was that? Right? So we had moved to Greensburg because of this church, and it was a Pentecostal, get up, sing, dance, clap, speak in tongues, feel the spirit, and that type of thing. I'm not sure what happened, but Mom got a disillusion from that, and we ended up going to the Baptist church. And I enjoyed that a little bit more because there was at least a youth group and things like that. But that religion thing, it just, I saw so much hypocrisy in what I was being told on Sunday and versus how I saw people live their lives. And then the whole science thing, I remember being 14 or 15 and just things not adding up. So I was pretty sure at that age that I was agnostic at the bare minimum. It was about this time, around this time frame, 13, 14, 15, that my mom only dated one guy that I remember, but he was around for a lot of my early years. I'm not going to name him, but I really believe after all these years that I witnessed him do some things, and he groomed me to keep my mouth shut. He groomed me so I wouldn't say anything about things that I had seen or heard. And just like a lot of Christian men in the late 80s and early 90s, they started grabbing a hold of this idea about abortion when nobody really cared about it. And this is a direct correlation between all those tactics of the late 70s and into the 80s to start demonizing abortion for a vote. Those Christian men got so wrapped up in abortion, I saw it directly. I witnessed the Wichita abortion protest of the early 90s. I videotaped these protests as a kid. As a child, my mom would let me go with this guy to Wichita, and we would go to George Tiller's clinic. And he would give me this big over-the-shoulder camera, and he would have me record all the things going on. The women trying to come in, all the yelling at them, all the trying to preach to them, all the trying to talk to them. And you don't think that didn't piece together why I feel the way I do about femininity, about feminism, about abortion, about pro-choice? It was nuts. But along with the religious abuse and the physical abuse and the mental abuse that I suffered, there was sexual abuse as well. And I joke that since I wasn't old enough to go to Canada's Boundary Waters and Boy Scouts, that I got molested instead. I didn't get molested by a leader, a scout leader, an adult, anything like that. I was abused by a peer. I was probably 11 years old, and I missed out on a chance to go to the Boundary Waters in Canada because I wasn't 13. And so I went with another group of scouts to Spanish Peaks outside of Walsenburg, Colorado. That's when everything started. It started with just him asking questions, like had I ever masturbated before? Had I ever had an orgasm? Had I ever looked at porn? And up until this point, I hadn't. I would get these boners, and I wouldn't know what was going on, and I wouldn't know what to do with them because I didn't have a dad to ask, and I didn't feel comfortable asking my mom. So that's how it started, with him showing me how things worked. And then there was the grooming that began once we got home. The grooming was in form of, hey, come over, play video games. Oh, hey, look at this porn mag. Oh, hey, I'll suck your dick first and then you suck mine. So I didn't recognize it as peer abuse until 20 years or later. I was working for a restaurant in Topeka, and I was on my way home. And I was listening to it was Dr. Drew, but it wasn't Loveline. And he started talking about peer abuse. And I was just like, holy shit. Like I'd always chalked it up to boys being boys, right? This lasted about 2 or 3 years. During this period and beyond, I had to prove myself that I wasn't gay. So I became hypersexualized. And I really liked girls. I really wanted to be around girls. I wanted affection from girls. So that lens would kind of follow me and shape a lot of what's happened in my life. Very, very, very few people know that story, and I hope that it helps. And if you're in this situation at any age, reach out to somebody. You don't have to go through this alone. I do remember telling my mom about the abuse years later, and her reply to me was, "What do you want me to do about it?" But even as a 60, 70-year-old woman, she still didn't know what to do with me. She still didn't know how to handle me. She still didn't know what to say to me. Like, I remember times where my abuser would come over and he would knock on the door and he'd want me to come out and play. And I would beg my mom not to answer the door, or I would beg her to tell him that I wasn't home or that I was sick, and she just didn't understand. And then you figure out the triangulation, the abuse, the grooming. None of that was my fault. And the hypersexuality and the confusion and the hunger to feel worthy, those were adaptive responses to what I had been through. Abuse makes you look at everyone in the world in a different way for a lot of reasons. But that acting out was surviving. That was my surviving, right? I was on probation. I had been through Scared Straight. I had spent 5 days in Kiowa County jail. I started smoking cigarettes around then, which I quit 2017. So I've been 8 years without cigarettes. I lashed out a lot. I acted out a lot. I was craving attention. I was the class clown. Acting out, shoplifting, stealing, fighting, lying. A little bit of a pyro, setting shit on fire. You know, all that acting out, when you're told by someone you have the eyes of someone they despise, and how they've described him as a piece of shit and a no-good human being and a loser and an addict, that's a lot. That's a lot to take on for a kid. It's all I wanted was to be supported and loved and not abused. I had some sanctuaries growing up in Greensburg. I had Ryan's house. Ryan's mom and dad didn't care if I was there, when I was there, if I needed to be there. My mom would kick me out and then get mad at me when I would leave and wouldn't come home, and she'd threaten to call the cops on me. But Ryan's house was a refuge for me. And then Justin's house was too. I knew I had a place to go. During the abuse, music was another thing for me that really helped. But music to my mom was really the devil. Like literally the devil. I would sit in my closet. I had a little transistor radio, and I would sit in my closet at night, and I would try to pick up any station I could, any music, which back then wasn't anything. And I had a buddy growing up, Ryan Peters, and he's the one that really introduced me to a lot of music. And then when I worked at Dillon's in Greensburg, the older guys that worked there, they would teach me a lot about music that would come over the radio. We would listen to KICT 95 out of Wichita. And so they would like tell me who sang this song, and this guy used to be in this band, and this guy does this. And man, I loved all of it, right? And then Ryan introduced me to the Beatles. The Beatles were acceptable to Mom. She was fine with Love Me Do and I Want to Hold Your Hand and all that bullshit. But Ryan also loved Ozzy. And I can remember him showing me these album covers of all those Ozzy albums and just feeling like innately evil inside of me because of all the things I'd been preached to. But then I got into rap. I don't even really remember how, but it was 1988. I was 12 years old. There's a lot of things going on around then. But I found KRS-One, Boogie Down Productions, Public Enemy, NWA, Eazy-E. And there were older guys, of course, that I had gotten this stuff from. There was one kid that he actually had a satellite, so we could actually, get all this stuff, all this music. That's how we learned it. But we also had a place in Greensburg called Randall's Electronics. And you could go in there and man, I can't remember old man Randall's name. But his son was Vic and his daughter was Cheryl. But you could go into Randall's Electronics and they had this giant, thick catalog, and you could order any music you wanted. Anything you wanted, you could order on cassette and then later on CD. And they didn't care if it had cuss words, parental advisory. They didn't care. They'd order it for you. So that was like my saving grace, being in a small town that had no great radio. MTV was not on cable at that point. But there was one incident. I was listening to Too Short Dogs in the House. And yeah, the lyrics do not age well, I know. But I was upstairs and I was listening to Too Short on my Walkman, doing some homework, and I was rapping out loud. And there's this line, bitch, 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 make me rich, comes on. And I rap that out loud. And as I'm finishing up, I feel those earphones just get ripped off of my head. My mom had came up the stairs and heard me, had heard her son in his finest moment. There was another incident where, so I would go to school, and if she was off for the day, I figured she was going to go through my shit. She always did. And I would come home, and I would open up the door super slow. And if I heard her coming down the stairs very quickly, I knew something was wrong. Actually, 90% of my time coming home, I would be very cautious and open the door and what kind of sounds would come. If I wouldn't hear any sounds, I knew I was great or she was napping, and I wasn't going to get any wrath at that moment. Maybe later it was coming. But I remember one day I come home and she's down the stairs, and I'm like, shit, what now? And she's like, I found a tape. And it says, oh, no, I think she asked, she first accused me of doing drugs. Like, you're on drugs. And I'm like, what? But I didn't do drugs at this point in my life. I come home and she's got this Tesla tape, Psychotic Supper. And there's a song on it called Toke About It. And I had no idea what the word toke even meant. But she did, apparently, and she accused me of smoking marijuana by the name of a song. But music, we'll get into music later, more in depth. I think the 4th or 5th episode is my music episode. A few of my jobs growing up, my first job ever, I mowed lawns around town. I worked at the Care and Share. It was a local thrift shop that was ran by the churches. I would work in the basement and sorting things and doing whatever they needed. And then my first paycheck job was Dillon's. I also worked at a dry cleaner in town. And then I worked for an older man named Arnold Barnes, just doing small things around his Ponderosa, as he called it. I also had Boy Scouts. I grew up in Scouts. Like I mentioned, I mean, that's where the abuse started, right? But Scouts for me up until then was absolutely amazing. I got to do so many things I would have never got to do without Boy Scouts, especially not having that male role model in the house. My aunts and uncles, were fantastic. They were really kind to me. And when I got old enough to where mom couldn't control me anymore through her abuse, her physical abuse, she couldn't hurt me anymore because I was getting bigger. She would call up my uncles and have them come over to whoop my ass with a hanger or a belt. How awesome was that for them, do you think, huh? It sure wasn't awesome for me, and I'm sure it's the last thing they wanted to do, was come over and deal with Josh. And this is when everything started to change. I was 15, I was standing out in my driveway, and for some reason, it finally fucking hit me. It hit me that one of these days, I was going to be able to leave. I was going to be able to get out of here. I was going to be able to leave Greensburg, leave my situation, and go live a life. And that was huge for me. Graduated in 1994, and I'd always wanted to go to KU, and I had no idea why other than basketball. That was it. I never graduated KU. I was there for a semester. I was playing basketball at Robinson Gymnasium, and I hurt my ankle super, super bad. And I lived off campus. This was early on in the semester. I had crutches and shit. And the only class that I would go to, I had no business going to. It was an international relations class. It was a junior level course. I'm a freshman fresh out of Southwest Kansas in a lecture hall of 900 kids. And of course I flunked that class too, but I don't know why I went to that one. I liked it. So I went back to Greensburg for Christmas break, and I get a letter from KU saying they want me to not come back, basically saying, please don't come back. You have a 0.00 GPA. Please don't come back. So I ended up going to Ottawa University in Ottawa, Kansas, because I knew some folks. I used to go to church camp at Camp Christie in Scott City, and that's a Baptist-affiliated camp. So I knew some people, and they got me into OU off my high school grades. So all this time, I've got something to prove. I always have this chip in my shoulder. I gotta prove that I'm the smartest and the fastest, and I'm not dumb, and just because of this, I'm not that. And man, I was sure I was something else to deal with. But I went to KU and I went to OU, and then that's really where I learned how to deal with other races and other people and other cultures, other identities. And I've come to understand that we just all want the same thing. We want shelter, we want food, we want companionship, and we want ours to be safe, and we want ours to be happy. And everybody's got a story, and everybody wants to tell it. So I go to college at OU. I meet my ex-wife at Walmart. I started working for Walmart in Ottawa, and I meet my ex-wife. And my first daughter, JC, was born in 1997. My second daughter, Jara, was born in 1999. My third daughter, Jenna, was born in 2001. And my fourth daughter, Josie, was born in 2006. Those girls are what saved me. Those girls are what have saved my life. Because I could have gone either way at that moment. I could have been dead or in jail, strung out, drugged up. But those little girls saved my life. They are amazing women. All four of them. And they're all four so different. And it was important to me to try to be a good dad. It was important to me to stick around, for one, even though I divorced their mother. And I'm not trying to paint myself as a great guy or whatever, but that's why I couldn't be a weekend dad. Every other week, they were at my house, and then they were a week at their mom's. Until they got older, of course. The older three. Josie's my daughter with Jessie, my wife, who I've been with for 23 years. So when I met Jessie, I'd known her for a few years, but there was just something about her. There was something about that woman that, man, just drew me to her. So we have Josie, and we've been through ups and downs, and she's still here. She's absolutely amazing. She's changed me as much as I've changed her. But a lot of these years were filled with depression, and that manifested itself through rage and anger at everything. I used to say, everything I have is because of me. I got no handouts. Everything is because of me. And guys like me who've been through what we've been through, we do feel like we've done everything. We've been through a lot. It makes us resourceful. It makes us independent. It makes us have trust issues. But then, I've realized that I haven't done everything by myself. People have given me jobs. People have given me second chances. Many people have given me second chances. They've helped me when I've needed it. I have not done everything by myself. No man is an island. We are all one. We are all connected. So then what changed? What happened? Why did I get to where I am right now, to where I feel calm and I feel equanimity and I feel some peace? I didn't like cannabis at all in high school. I didn't like the way it made me feel. Alcohol was, whatever. I liked alcohol. It was fine, but I don't drink now. But LSD, I took my first LSD trip in college at OU a number of times. And those were all, just what you do LSD for when you're in college, just to have fun, fuck off with, right? I remember my last LSD trip was in 1997. My roommate and I had just gotten a copy of Transistor by 311, so it had to have been in August, after August. And he took 2 hits and I took a hit, and he sat on the couch and we just played Transistor on repeat. And I remember sitting out on the deck, and I was watching stars in the sky just shoot and spin and burst and fly across the air. And that was my last acid trip until about 2019. Because I was a source guy, and the source of LSD kind of fell off after the 90s, and I wasn't going to kill myself. So years later, I was able to find a reliable source and clean source of LSD. And that's helped me tremendously. And we'll do episodes on LSD later, psychedelics, and how we need to use them in a responsible setting. So I lived my life working in restaurants and all that for years, raising these girls, being mad, angry, hypersexualized, addicted. And then, I don't remember, I think it was during COVID at some point, I had seen a friend of mine from high school, Carla Carpenter, had shared a meme on Facebook that had to do with the 4 agreements. And all it was a meme that listed the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take things personal. Don't make assumptions. And do your best. And that meme just, man, it hit me. I was like, man, yeah. 4 agreements. 4 agreements. So I'd share memes and all this. I don't know if I realized it was a book. I think I did some research on it. Never bought the book. And then I went to Omaha for a 311 concert, and one of my friends, Destiny Delgado, was there, and she brings me a copy of the 4 agreements. She gifts me a copy of the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I take it home, and I think I read the first, introduction, a little bit here and there. I was like, okay, cool. And then about a week later, I caught COVID for the first time. This was in 2022. So I had gone 2 years without catching COVID. And so I caught COVID, and I'm off work, and I'm laying in bed, and I pick up the 4 agreements, and I start to read it. And when I first got into the 4 agreements, I was like, well, I knew right away which one that was going to speak to me the most, and that was the don't take things personal. I knew that I took things way too personal because of the way I grew up in my childhood and abuse and things like that. I knew that. But when I got done, it ended up that be impeccable with your word was the one that spoke to me the most. I can remember going through the book. It's a very heavy book if you're going to be open and honest with yourself about a lot of what it talks about. But the 4 agreements changed my life. I can remember reading passages and tears just streaming down my face. I can remember feeling so relaxed and clear and focused and overwhelmed. No drug had ever made me feel like that. But I could feel it. I could feel what these words, these 4 agreements were doing to transform my life as I read them. I can remember laying in my bed when I got done with the book. I remember shutting it, and I remember thinking, God, why had nobody ever showed me the 4 agreements before now? And then it quickly dawned on me that I wouldn't have been ready for the 4 agreement message then. I had to receive it now. The 4 agreements find you when you need it. I have passed this book on to many people. I have suggested this book to many people. And one thing I've learned to tell them is don't feel like you have to read it right now. Don't feel like you have to get into it right now. It will come to you when you need it. One of my good friends, I gave him a copy a long time ago, and we've talked about it, and I'm not sure that he's read the whole thing. But he passed the 4 agreements on to his mother-in-law. And she was profoundly changed by the 4 agreements. And again, it made me realize that the 4 agreements wasn't for my buddy. It was for his mother-in-law. I had to pass the 4 agreements to him in order for her to receive it. Just a lot of things just shed away after I read that book. I could literally feel things and anxieties and emotions and depressions just falling away from me. We will have an episode on the 4 agreements later, more in depth. So the other thing that really helped transform me is I found Ram Dass, who was formerly known as Richard Alpert, Tim Leary's sidekick in the psychedelic movement in the early days. And Richard became Ram Dass. I like to joke that I used to trip acid with Leary in the 90s, and now I trip LSD with Ram in my 40s and 50s. Ram Dass and his book Be Here Now and Be Loved Now has been amazing for me. You can simply go on Spotify right now and look up Ram Dass, and anything that comes up, I would bet that you would gain something from. but we're going to do an episode on Ram Dass and how I found him and what he's done. The other thing that's really helped me is a book by David Brooks called How to Know a Person. And how to know a person, it involves developing skills in active listening, asking good questions, and fostering deep connections by seeing other struggles and strengths with empathy and wisdom. Brooks advocates for a shift from a culture of disconnection to one that prioritizes genuine human understanding. I'm going to tell you what, I sat down and I had all these notes. I spent days agonizing over all these notes about what I wanted to fit into this episode, and I realized that I can explore a lot of these themes later as we go. Hopefully, I was able to relay why I feel the way that I do. I hope this helps you understand why this is important to me, to help you realize you don't have to suffer. Because I know how living angry and depressed feels. You have value, and you're not defined by the things that you have done or the things that have happened to you. You're not bad or weird, and it's not your fault. I currently feel like I've entered my second childhood, and this one is way more fun than the first. I had to go through all that so others don't have to. Everything works out as it's supposed to. And you can't hurt me now. Learning to love myself better helps me love more. It helps me continue to grow as a human and be a better man. So thank you for joining me today. That's my story in a nutshell. What we can expect from future episodes is more in-depth talk on the 4 agreements, Ram Dass, music, food, psychedelics, fathers, daughters, cats. There's so much. So we'll have guests that will help us in this process that we can all learn from. All right. I hope you stay right here for episode number 2. It's the story of how I got to this podcast by taking chances and making that leap. I just want you to remember that you are not defined by the things that have happened to you, and you are not defined by the things that you have done. And hopefully, I've taught you some things that you could not see and some things that you couldn't know. If this episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs a little nourishment. New episodes drop bi-weekly, so bring a friend, and let's help walk each other home. This has been the Morning Almonds Podcast. Please support local musicians, artists, and other creatives.